Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with RemotAbility, and it's entitled, Are You Getting Your Strategy Right? In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guests, Deepak, Michael, Francis and Paul, we hope to spark your interest and engage you in the conversation, as well as provide you with some ideas to take back to your respective businesses. To round off the session, we'll be having a Q&A. I'm Fiona Keough, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time wisely to quickly run through some housekeeping. Remember, it's important to interact with us to maximise the benefit. And as you know, there's no need to take too many notes now because we'll be providing you with a recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A button on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Deepak, Michael, Francis, Paul, or myself from time to time. Don't forget, we're having that Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please type your questions as we go along, because if you're anything like me, you'll forget to ask them. If you're listening through headphones or speakers and experience any technical issues with your internet, please note that on the control panel, you can click the raise hand button and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid, or you can revert to your confirmation registration email, and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes are available there for you. I know that most of you are familiar with asking questions. Been to a lot of Zoom sessions, but let's try out that Q&A button on the control panel now, just in case you haven't ever asked a question. And the question that I need you to ask using that Q&A button is, are you currently working from home or in office? I can put my hand up and say, I'm at home, which is why you can't see my background. I'm going to guess that Michael is at home. Oh, here we go. We've got 100% working from home at this point in time. Oh, I've got someone who's in both places. Fantastic. Work from home, at home, home. Fantastic. Okay, so we're predominantly at home today. So I hope you're enjoying the home environment and not suffering from too many interruptions. I think most of us have got kids back at school. Yay. With that, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Deepak Silvarathne, Founder and Chief Operating Officer of RemotAbility, Paul Carl, Head of Member Services, Avant Mutual, Francis Southard, Assistant Commissioner, Australian Taxation Office, and last but certainly not least is Michael Clark, Director and Lead Consultant at CXTT Consulting. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Michael Clark to the microphone. It's over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you everybody for tuning in today. What we're hoping today is to give you a bit of an overview initially of from myself, of some of the broader macro trends in the Australian market before I hand to Deepak for some of the insights from a global perspective from the RemotAbility solution, and then obviously our fantastic case studies with Fran and Paul. So 2 years ago, it seems only 2 years ago, we started locking down across Australia as COVID-19 flared up. And in the past 2 years, we've seen significant changes within our economy, within our workplaces, and within the country at large. I was recently looking at some of the data to have a look at what are we seeing in terms of trend changes within Australia. Now, the recent Australian Bureau of Statistics data shows that 41% of Australians are regularly working from home. Now, that seems quite low when we think about it, and particularly when we look at the responses to the Q&A at the beginning of this session. But if we think about those industries that can't work from home, hospitality, a lot of retail, construction, then the numbers do start to level out. Now, that 41% regularly working from home is up from 32% in the ABS data from 2019. I think what isn't coming through that data, though, is the amount of time that people are working from home. So whilst the regular work from home was the question, the number of days that people are working from home has certainly changed. Now, when we talk about lockdowns and restrictions, we obviously went through a pseudo lockdown in a number of states and territories towards the tail end of last year and early this year, as we all rode the Omicron wave. What we saw during December was a 58% reduction in time in the office. So 58% of people that had been in offices moved away from offices during that period. And the trend overall is 20 to 25% less than pre-COVID. So there's 20 to 25% less office occupancy on average than pre-COVID. What we're not seeing in it, again, what we're not seeing in that data, though, is what risks or issues are coming up in the way that people are working from home. And I know Deepak will provide some insight into that from a global perspective very shortly. The other factors that are impacting on our work from home, but broadly on our employment market, we've seen the lowest unemployment rate since 2008, since the global financial crisis. So again, people are employed in record numbers. Now, underemployment is often another factor in there. Underemployment is also at its lowest rate in a long time. So people are working and working longer. And again, that is offset by the fact that our temporary visa holders have dropped by 800,000 since 2019. So we peaked at 2.4 million visa holders working in the Australian economy in 2019. That is down by 800,000 to today. So that is a huge exodus from the Australian workplace of valued workers with core skills and capabilities. Now, where we're seeing that flow through, and many of you will be aware of this, is around talent shortages, growth in wages, the ability and challenges in recruiting people, and where your ability to manage hybrid and remote working is a key differentiator in the way that you're able to attract and retain your workers. There's a lot of buzz terms out there, and the Great Resignation is one of those. But up to 40% of Australians have indicated that they will leave their employer over the next 12 months. So there certainly is a lot of challenges in the broader macro environment. Now, what we will also see is that a lot of government and businesses across the country have no or limited strategy on the way that they're dealing with their people working from home. This is an opportunity to get it right and to have a flexible and adaptive strategy. So there are a lot of good news stories. We're one of the highest vaccinated countries in the world. We know that high vaccination rates on average are leading to lower hospitalisation rates. So when we have people that are off work due to COVID exposure, that is generally a shorter timeline than it is in other countries globally. So there are a number of positives and there are a number of challenges in the broader environment. So I think for us, when we think about how do we manage the strategy and the development of remote and hybrid working arrangements, we need to keep a number of those macro trends in mind because it is forcing pressure on our employees around where they can find other opportunities, where they can seek increased wages, and where they may get greater flexibility with a different employer. But to tell us a bit more about some of those trends at an organisational level, I'm going to pass to Deepak. Deepak is the founder and Chief Operating Officer of RemotAbility, which is a global tool, and he's going to take us through some of that data and insight. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Fiona, for that introduction too. Michael, I was wondering whether that drop in of what do you say 25% of office space or office workers not coming into office during December, was that people taking a pre-early Christmas holiday at all?
58% drop in December, that's outside of normal leave period. So 58% in October. But that's, from an Australian context, it's where we did see that big jump in cases and challenges around Omicron in New South Wales, Victoria, and ACT in particular.
Right.
So that has had an impact. But yes, that's outside normal holiday leave.
Right. I was just wondering. But yes, people did deserve a break too. Anyway, let me start by giving you a little context for those of you who do not know customer services audit or Snapshots or RemotAbility. So Snapshots, we developed an audit and benchmarking tool for call centers and launched in 2009. Today we got 3,500 odd customers across 30 countries. But importantly, with Snapshots, what we do is we provide a holistic audit. And importantly, in that process, provide verified data that helps contact centers and organizations make structured decisions about what they need to do, find gaps, and go on forward. We also offer accreditation as part of our Snapshots assessment, and we incidentally happen to be the Auscontact accreditation partner in this part of the world. Now, in 2020, we started assisting our customers actually set up, because we've been with our Snapshots tool assessing remote workers and distributed workers for the last 10 years, including looking at health and safety and mental health and how you manage them. So we were supporting our customers. However, in December 2020, we pulled together this tool called RemotAbility, because a lot of our customers said, look, we want this across our organization, because look, this COVID thing is not going away. So with that, there was also some distinct changes in the way responsibilities occurred. So formerly, our employer was responsible for the office workspace. But today, both the employer and the individual is actually responsible for that space that we have, which we now call home and an office space. Together with all of that, what happened was we also got basically directives from a government, as well as organizations like the ILO, the WHO, the UN, on what should actually constitute good remote work practices, and of course, compliance to some of these as well. So what we were able to do was to pull together, as we've done with Snapshots, all the global standards around remote work. And there's about 170 or 175 today, little checkpoints that we worked into the assessment kit. And these cover workspace, environmental conditions, technology, personal productivity and mental health, and insurance and accounting and tax, which is changing considerably. This is a ready reckoner for a lot of people who are consultants. Now, with workspace, we understand workspace quite a bit, but when it comes to working alone and traveling, it moves a little bit away from the traditional health and safety working alone. For instance, 2 weeks ago, a customer of ours couldn't get hold of one of their team members, tried to get hold of next of kin, got hold of the building manager, opened the door and found that he'd passed away from a heart attack. So now there's responsibilities on us to ensure that we've got our organization has access to our dwelling if we cannot, if there are challenges for our next of kin to get there. Same thing when it comes to data collection and ethics and privacy, where we need to be a lot more responsible, and there are greater responsibilities forced on us, which we definitely don't necessarily are fully aware of. We also need to know what happens if there's a data breach and how we need to report it and how we need to manage it. The next key issue is that with schedule and productivity, even though we've been going 2 years, it's a challenge for us to understand, to get to that discipline of knowing what to do from the time we get up to the time we get to bed. And it's not just that alone. There are also challenges around staying connected, around actually taking responsibility for our own physical and mental well-being. Now, these standards apply not necessarily to individuals alone, but to organizations as well. And there's approximately about 125 now checkpoints that cover remote working, the types of remote work the organization wants to provide, the distributed workforce, the tools, the collaboration tools. We understand what WFM is, but workforce optimization tools like knowledge management tools, like analytical tools, like recording and security tools, and collaboration tools are all coming to the fore, and they're developing all the time, but we do need to keep ahead of this, especially around data and privacy and a whole range of issues. The next challenge for organizations is actually defining policies and procedures to meet this new world that we are working in. And attendance and availability isn't too much of an issue when it comes to contact centers. However, across the organization, defining what attendance and availability means, defining what absenteeism means, how do we manage ourselves in this digital world, are definitely challenges. And what we found is 1/3 of us have actually got there, but 2/3 of us haven't quite got there as yet. Now, in the context of any team or any member, we understand that there are some of our team members that are actually very capable of working remotely, and there are some that are not quite capable. Also, there are some that are at risk. Now, we need to understand these needs, and across the organization, this sort of, we really need to understand right across the organization what their needs are, what their capabilities are, to actually to be able to develop and support and keep our team members safe and healthy and productive. RemotAbility, actually, one of the key challenges that RemotAbility addressed was the need to be able to understand across our team who needs help, what are the key areas that we can actually contribute to productivity. So what I've been able to do is draw 2 or 3 sets of global data relating to contact centers. And let me start with the first piece, very much related to contact centers, is that between 8 and 12%, this is across the globe, of people cannot actually work from home because of relationship issues, because of domestic violence and other factors. When it comes to contact centers, it's actually much more. So we need to be able to provide them, as we are supporting with some of our customers, provide them with safe houses if they can't quite get to work. We need to understand first who these people are, and be able to actually have options for them to be able to work and function safely and effectively. Similarly, 40% of us work from remote workspaces. Now, just because you have a computer and are connected, it does not mean working from cold garages constitutes a proper workspace. As one of our, in our last session with PwC, one of their speakers said that they actually found a couple of agents working off cold garages, and they had and it was not the right workspace, as we know. The other piece too is that there's 62% of us that actually work from a shared workspace, whether it may be the pet, a 20-year-old cat in my case, to kids, to others. We work from shared workspaces, and the important piece to remember is that each household is different and each person's circumstances are different. So we can't have a carte blanche approach. We need to be a lot more specific. From a health and safety perspective, across the world, we've got 1/4 of us, depending on where we are, that run more than 5 or 6 appliances off a single plug point. And what that actually means is that we need to be able to make sure that our team members are working safely. And if in one of the cases of our customers, they found that, look, there's 100 of them or 120 of them that needed these PowerPoints, and they actually said, look, as a welfare measure, you go buy yourself to these specs, these PowerPoint and plug points, so that you can actually remain safe. Because when you have a computer down, it not only affects productivity, there's a whole range of administrative area that follows, and importantly, it actually impacts the person and their family as well, because they can't work. Now, the other important piece is, if we actually look around the room and look for a show of hands, half of our first aid kits at home are not fully stocked and adequate to meet the accidents that happen around the home. One of our customers who provides as part of the induction and entry, they provide a first aid kit to their employee, and just on the third day, this lady was able to save the little kid's fingers because she had a full restock first aid kit. And so ensuring that we send that message across is pretty important. Similarly with messages, 2/3 of us work with glare, with sort of unfavorable glare on our screens. Now, it's usually a set and forget piece, and a customer of ours, one of the top 20 employers across Australia and New Zealand, put in their weekly digest a note around, stay away from glare, set it up properly. And we asked them how many people clicked through, and they said 3. One, the person that actually wrote it, and 2 others by accident. So it's pretty important in terms of actually understanding how we also communicate and what we need to communicate. This area is particularly key for contact centers, where the Medical Research Council says that 1 in 5 of us will have some degree of mental challenges. However, when it comes to contact centers, our frontline agents not only are human, but also they encounter what's called emotional labor, where you're all the time acting and trying and having to be nice. Now you combine that with unsatisfactory supervisor relationship, you are pushing them against the wall, and also you're pushing them to that Great Resignation, plus of course a whole lot of issues around productivity. So that's something we need to be wary of. We've already talked about making sure that they understand if they're working alone, what needs to be done. This is very key, and again, within the context of contact centers, there's a lot of this that happens. So it's usually higher than the rest of the organization. The other piece too is, whilst we understand from a agent's perspective, they do have a schedule and they do work to a schedule, but going beyond that, it's about understanding how we actually engage with, how we encourage them to engage with their own manager and the rest of their family and rest of the business as well. Because one of the key challenges we have as managers is that we are not really taught to have mental health conversations. And because we're not taught to have these mental health conversations, it's just a glib, hello, how are you doing? Are things all right? I hope your kid's fine, and that's it. But really, as one manager said to me, what we really need to have are conversations that say, hey, are you having a Tramadol, Panadol, or a Damnitol moment? It's about getting real. And that's pretty important. Another aspect of the sort of schedule and structure is the fact that 80% of what we have on our screens and around our tables are not really useful for what we're doing. So ensuring that we have a structure around that too is important towards productivity. Now, supporting a lot of the RemotAbility data that we are having is the Avant's Global Wellbeing Survey, where they said that 90% of companies actually have wellness initiatives. However, only 55% have strategy to back it up. What this is saying is that there's a lot of information, a lot of money is being spent without knowing where they're going. And also, another reason why a majority of employees poo-poo some of these wellness programs. It's not just knowing the household as well as the person's mental state of mind. It's also making sure that we are connected. So just because they can connect to the internet, 7% of us will have some challenges along the way, and it's actually pinpointing what those challenges are. It's about knowing whether it's a network, whether it's a bandwidth, whether they can't access some applications, whether they have challenges with their own Wi-Fi at home. These are important. It's important for us to actually know where the issue is. If you don't know that, you should be talking to your IT fairly immediately. Now, given the fact that each of us, funnily enough, have our profiles, our remote work profiles, so does the organization. It's only when you combine the individual remote work profile and the organization profile can we actually pull out a proper remote work, modern work strategy. What that actually means is once we've understood the individual and the remote works and the organization's profile, we can then execute. We can send out communications where we have 10,000 of them click through the glare, the issues around glare on our screens. We can actually decide what are the key welfare and well-being measures that we can put. We can actually employ our monies effectively. And also ensuring that we are targeting welfare and well-being. There's a whole range of risk management issues around not just assets, individuals, compliance and liability that we need to have. There's IT and collaboration. There's finance and cost and taxation and insurance. Knowing some of this data can either cost you a lot or save you a lot. If you don't know, that is. It won't save you a lot if you don't know. But when it comes to induction, recruitment and training, the old pieces have to be dusted off, even if you reviewed it 6 months ago, because things have changed. And similarly with strategy, are you having a safe house? Are you having different floors? Depending on, if you've got 58% not in office, that's a significant change in the way you have your property portfolio. Importantly, in all of this, it's really about ensuring you got the right budgets, the resources, and importantly, the right outcomes. What are you looking to achieve with all of this? So let me leave you with this question around what is the evidence that informs your hybrid working strategy? How are you dealing with the different arrangements? How are you dealing with the disconnect between employers and employees in terms of their expectations? How are you actually monitoring, because households and people change, how are you actually monitoring these changes so that you can ensure an even productivity platform? How are you actually developing your technology to meet some of these new changes? What are your insurance, accounting and tax? And importantly, how are you mirroring the physical culture into the digital environment? So with that, let me now hand you over to Paul, who will be taking us through how they have approached this whole hybrid remote work piece. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Deepak. I'm breaking out into a cold sweat right now, as you asked too many questions. I don't have all the answers to all those things you just asked, so good timing, I guess. Avant Mutual, interesting as we go through those. Here at Avant, we look after doctors. Now, we're Australia's leading medical organisation. We've been around for 125 years. We're established by doctors, for doctors. So we are a mutual. Doesn't mean a not-for-profit. We make money. It just profitability goes back into members via retirement funds, education facilities, scholarships, and so on and so forth. We've got, believe it or not, one of the largest, most experienced medico legal defence teams in Australia. So we have a legal division, and quite a large legal division. Lots of lawyers and solicitors in every capital city. And that's really been tested over the last couple of years with COVID as we've gone through. I guess in addition to indemnity, we also run doctors' health insurance, business insurance, life and disability insurance, travel insurances, and everything all around the financial well-being of our doctors. What that's meant for us during COVID, or more importantly for our customers or members during COVID, they've had probably a bigger roller coaster than we have, and I feel a little bit humbled in talking about my challenges in the employee space when our customers have had so much more. And I guess depending on which industry you're in, I'm probably glad I'm not in the airline industry or the travel industry, but equally we've still been dealing with other issues. Specifically, local GPs not knowing whether they can give people a vaccination shot, not feeling comfortable giving it, no indemnity, am I covered if something happens? Because in the early days we were reading all these horrible stories around that. Surgical disruptions, doctors not having an income. Believe it or not, they rely on income like the rest of us do, and if they're not doing surgeries, they're not earning. For a lot of them, they're not earning money. And then the entire learning cohort. For us, in any given year, there are tens of thousands of medical students attending our universities at various stages. They have practical exams, they have hands-on exposures, which right through COVID have been totally disrupted. So we're seeing some of those student numbers drop off and some of those trainee numbers drop off. So it's been an interesting time. We've had to pivot as a company and look at implementation of hardship practices and how we support doctors financially. COVID information hub, how do we spin up and get together the right information at the right time as to what's happening with COVID, what's happening with vaccinations. Reading the newspapers were in the early days very confusing. There was a lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and deception being put out there, which just drove a massive influx of inquiries from our doctors. And then, of course, we had to kind of pull up stumps and send everyone home. That was an interesting one. And as we went into that early phase one, that early 2020 mark, and I remember my last flight, I think, was the 27th of February, and was a work trip down to Melbourne. And you don't forget those kind of things. But in the early days, we were probably lucky in that we had a cloud-based telephony platform. Thank God for that. That was probably a godsend at the time. Everything else was a mess. We had zero work from home agents. We had zero work from home capability from anything. All of ours, like I'm sure a lot of you in the audience, everything was done face to face. You onboarded someone, it was done face to face. Performance management meetings, performance success and celebrations, all face to face. The leadership delivery team meetings, all these kind of things were new. So suddenly having everyone from home, and then even we sent them out Surface Pros. That's great. Docking stations, how do we get them? So the office ended up being plundered of equipment. Docking station screens, we couldn't order them, and I'm sure for a lot of you, Microsoft's our key supplier, had real supply issues in the early days, and IT couldn't cope with how do we now ship stuff. We usually have a bulk thing in each of our capital city offices. Now we have to send it out to every single employee. We don't have a mechanism for that. So again, like a lot of people, those things had to be solved early. And we went through those, just problem solving. What's next? How do we get to the next thing? Early days for us, agents going home with their equipment was nice. The VPNs worked, but then we discovered the bandwidth challenges. Our systems weren't configured to having everyone connected to the VPN at the same time. Simple things like that. So that was early days, and I guess we overcame a lot of those as all of you did, with a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of band-aids and sticky tape to get through them. Interesting, Deepak, looking at the work from home checklist. I know we had one for the odd occasion when we might had a lawyer that wanted to work from home, but it was never really tested on any kind of scale. And so, we have people working, as you say, in garages, sitting at kitchen tables. Early days being on a conference call with a group of people and competing because the guy talking had his partner in the background also talking on her work conference call. These bizarre things that we went through. I guess coming from there, and then move back into the office, and it was actually harder for us moving back to the office, especially in the first phase, towards the end of 2020. Getting my years mixed up. Towards the end of the first year of COVID, when we started to come out of lockdown, it was how do we now get people back in the office? And there was this massive reluctance of the workforce to come back. Nobody wanted to come back. I now work from home. I'm comfortable with this situation. Lots of uncertainty and fears about vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So our businesses, I'm thankful for Avant and the early decision making. We got in early and decided and moved to a vaccination status, so all employees need to be vaccinated when we attend hospitals and so on and so forth. So it made sense for us in the healthcare space to be that kind of workplace. that came in, a new way of working came in, very quickly pivoted to flexible way of working. So we moved quickly to 2 to 3 days a fortnight in the office, if you're comfortable. And while officers were required to have masks indoors, depending on the local health department, we certainly said to people that feel comfortable, but it was, don't come in if you don't want to wear a mask all day. We understand. We have to abide by the health. So I think those practices really held us in good stead with our people. We restructured, being a contact centre, it's kind of that rock and a hard place. The member demand patterns didn't change so much. They still needed you. There's still the traditional ramp up to midday for calls. So we still had to make sure we had our coverage. But in saying that, things like adherence to schedule went out the window. With lots of apologies from people. Oh my God, my kid was sick, couldn't get them off to school, or the education from home and homeschooling. I need that time to set up my kids, so I need to change my start time, or I need flexibility. Time off during the middle of the day to make lunches or have lunch with family. It's not like you're in the office where you can just duck across the road and grab a sandwich. When you're working from home, you've got to prepare food. So a lot of things like that, those real world problems come into life. So we changed our scheduling to flexible scheduling. We looked at, we changed I modified the incentive program. We took the incentives totally off the production values. So we basically threw away adherence, handle time, after call work time. We threw those out and turned the incentives into outcome based. I know we talk a lot about this over the years, and it's hard. It is a nice aspirational shift to be quality focused and not operational. But being forced to do it is that it was both scary and amazing, because the outcome was fantastic. We actually dropped our AHT slightly, which was interesting when you're not looking at it. Also for us, I think we invested in technology. So we invested in our member contact. We put more money into digital capability and moved all of our contacts onto the contact center platform. So emails were handled outside of the platform via inboxes. We moved them into our telephony platform to ensure we had distribution and service levels and so on. Also gave us auto responses and a clearer visibility of what we're doing in that space with our members. The shift to video, you talk about performance managing someone and having a difficult conversation with someone, and doing it over video is so much harder than doing it face to face. Now, team leaders really struggled for a period of time. It was one of those catalysts for getting rid of KPI, those operational KPIs, and focusing on outcomes. Was it enabled the team leaders to have a far more productive performance conversation with someone while they were holding their cat on their lap or having their dog bark in the background because the postman came to the door. So some really good, what I think really good cultural changes have occurred in the business. And I guess for us, and I'll talk about positive outcomes, diversity in the workplace. Early days, we had one person, one wheelchair-bound person. They love not having to commute to the office, even as a part-time situation. It became such an easier life for that person, and subsequently we've managed to hire more people with impairments, and not just physical but mental health. So from a mental health perspective, I've got someone on the light end spectrum of autism, doesn't like being around people but is great at their job and work from home. So that's been a positive in terms of our workforce diversity. We've had a reduction in our turnover. All things, the early days, no one moved for about 6 months. As we went back into production, we now have settled into a sub 20% turnover. So people are leaving us, but leaving us to go return to their home country or career change, had an epiphany and are changing our career. So that's been really good. Unplanned or absenteeism, sub 7% for this last 12 months. It's been a real benefit, taking travel off the table. We still get people that sleep in and decide they don't want to come to work, or they get fatigued. One of the things that we have done is we've implemented a time off phone component to the roster. So it's a contact center, but I've given everyone gets the equivalent of 20% off phone time at their own request. So it can be 2 hours a day at their nomination, or it can be 1 day a week. But what we found with our workforce is that they sometimes struggle to be on the phone when family members had scheduled activities in the household. My kids come home at 3 o'clock every afternoon. Can I please be off calls between 3 and 5 or 3 and 4 so I can do emails and talk to them? So doing that has been a real boon, and then moving into that kind of, we've had people doing split shifts or taking long lunches. So can I have 2 hours for lunch and work either side of that? We've seen improved NPS results over the last 12 months as the members as our customers are feeling the quality of focus from our staff. And we have closer relationships with our people. I know conversations I'm starting, I'm spending the first 10 minutes asking about the pets, the kids, the little people who inevitably run past or stick their head up on a call. We're seeing inside our employees' homes. And, sometimes, internally, oh my God, I can't believe that person's working that way. But it's a real exposure, real vulnerability with the workforce, and we've kind of been forced to acknowledge, recognise, and deal with that. For me, and just as I kind of close out my view of the world, is we've still got some things in progress, things that aren't probably working where they should. Change management is really extremely hard. You cannot create that kind of change management environment in a window, in a screen. We do the meetings, we have the process, but as we're moving to a new system, we're still finding that a real challenge and still trying on new things. Internal demand of our staff, because we resolved onboarding, training, and exposure early, as we had to at Contact Centre, I've found that our internal turnover within the organisation has gone up significantly from almost no movement to losing people almost on a monthly basis to an internal vacancy, as the other divisions don't have the capability to do onboarding in that kind of technical or digital environment. So that's a little bit of a challenge to get in front of and build into our planning. And I guess, and as we approach back, we're not in the offices in any state at the moment. We're all working from home. No one wants to wear a mask in the office. I think this year we'll be back in the office soon, hopefully, and we're going to go through that cycle again of reluctance. So we're going to have to then go into how do we create an encouraging environment, and what do we do for those to not leave them behind? Because when everyone's working from home, it's an easier mix than when only some people are working from home. So that's probably all from me. Happy to hand over to Fran now.
Thanks, Paul. And I think I'm one of the only people actually in an office today, I think, from the poll taken earlier. It's interesting, obviously I'm from the Australian Tax Office, so, but again, whilst it's a different organisation, certainly a lot of the challenges and the experiences tend to be the same regardless of industry, particularly when you think of the people we're talking about and the services we provide. Whilst the content and some of the limitations or restrictions are a little bit different, actually the way we service and our focus on our people and our client is kind of consistent. So if I think about the ATO perspective and just some high-level context from our environment, we're a national business. Obviously, we have just over 20,000 employees that are internal ATO staff. We also utilise 3 outsourced providers, and we have a presence in every state. And whilst a big national business, fantastic, we've got lots of people that can shift quite quickly in theory. Working in every different state, and what we've experienced over the last couple of years translates to multiple state health orders with very different directives that actually need to be put into practice. And probably the other thing, and Paul certainly heard from you in relation to this, is that large-scale change. So large-scale change as an organisation, like everybody, has had to be a key focus. If we then look at our clients, I love to tell everybody that every person in Australia is one of our clients at some point. But if we think of COVID, the environmental challenges that it's presented, The other part of the ATO's position, we had to administer about 6 government initiatives, so stimulus programs aimed at supporting COVID. Those included things like the JobKeeper program, early release of super, and another number of initiatives that were aimed at businesses that are probably less known. So for us, we actually had this environment where not only did we have a heightened external environment that was impacting how we operate, where we operate, but we also actually had what we would call our peak period, which is normally for us tax time. So from July to November, we actually had that created overnight. So, you know, we heard about the Great Resignation. I like to think the Great Resignation is supported by, you know, some of the poor management practices. Suddenly people have choice. So our roles within our organisations become even more important. But we suddenly had heightened workforce requirements, limited flex options to move to a work from home solution, other than in our non-traditional frontline service areas. So for many years at the ATO, lots of people had been able to work from home, but none of our frontline contact centre or processing areas. It was an accepted thing that actually there was some challenges with you know, firewalls and things like that with the ATO, and the stability just wouldn't be there if we needed to work from home. And yet, as we all know, when things change overnight, you have to actually change overnight as well. So where did we start? If I think about the ATO, quite a traditional employer. We like to think we're pretty progressive, but you know, compared to some of the non-government organisations, we don't have the same sort of flexibility that some do have. So if we look at our environment, the onset of COVID, we were reactive. We had emerging tech challenges that we needed to quickly solve. Rapid shift, like everybody, in some states that needed to move to 100% working from home. We had this ramp up supply challenge. So not only did we need more people because we suddenly had more work, but actually we relied very heavily, as I said, on outsource partners who were in a traditional slow or low peak resource period. So they also had to ramp up very quickly. And when nobody was around trying to find jobs, that equally was a challenge for us. Our approach to everything was akin to a crisis management approach, which works for, you know, for some things, and it can work in the short term, but actually it's not sustainable for anybody, and quite often leads to decisions made on the fly that can sometimes come back to hurt you. So where did we start? Well, number one, we actually needed a tech solution for our contact centre. This was our absolute primary requirement. We needed people to be able to answer calls, and we needed them to be able to do it from home. So an interim solution was come up with very, very quickly. We also then needed to, similar to what Paul had described, really take stock of who had equipment, who could actually work from home, and how did we quickly mobilise equipment from every single office in the country and actually put it where it was needed most. And for us, it was a concentrated effort on Victoria in the first instance before shifting to our New South Wales colleagues. We then actually, in the background, had taken stock of every employee, to work out what everybody's basic needs were and how we could mobilise that. We then had to look internally. We had a lot of work that, you know, in the context of COVID, didn't necessarily sit well. So if we think of a debt collection, if you've suddenly got an external environment where people are losing jobs, losing hours, losing money, being provided government support, the last thing we as a government or we as an agency necessarily want to focus on is collecting debt from some of the people that are in those same set of circumstances. So for us, it was, well, how could we utilise that internal workforce a little bit differently? We quickly recognised that all those workforce challenges meant we needed to mobilise our internal staff. So we moved about 2,500 of our workforce to actually take calls. Now, again, you're all in the contact centre kind of environment. You would get the challenge of someone who might have worked for our organisation. Some of these were lawyers, accountants. Some of them hadn't spoken to clients ever in the roles that they performed for us. And they're taking calls, helping people understand a JobKeeper program and what it meant for them. It was met with some huge change management challenges, engagement and culture impacts. But interestingly, if we now look back, we would say it is a single pivotal moment for us as an organisation, and something we are now working on, ways to actually leverage the success that we experienced through that. And probably the other most important thing was we also needed more people than that. So we engaged about an additional 1,000 people. And we did that tapping into industries who had actually had the opposite effect. So Paul mentioned people that had changed careers from, the travel industry, etc. We still have a whole lot of people that were part of, airlines, travel agents, hospitality, that have made that shift and have actually decided to stay with us at the ATO. So we partnered with a couple of industry bodies to identify ways that we could engage under casual means in the first instance quite quickly, people who were just desperately looking for work. And as an organisation, we also came up with, a foundation COVID response strategy, which included a very firm working from home component. So where are we now? 2 years on, I'm happy to say we actually have a really strong people-focused strategy. We have a tiered approach to our buildings, our access, and working from home, and that is all about external environmental components. And it's actually really simple. I work in Queensland, a little bit of a different experience of the COVID environment than many others. But the building I'm in at the moment, we've just moved to what we call level 3, which means we encourage all of our people to work from home, but there are some circumstances that will take a case-by-case approach if they need to be in the office. And that's something that's actually now really well understood by our people. But it also allows us to have a true differentiated approach, because we then have a full case-by-case strategy that sits with it. We have ongoing tech issues still, where we hear some of the great examples where people have been able to think differently about accommodation holdings and buildings. Unfortunately for us, all of our work from home solution is actually still tethered to a work point in a building somewhere. It means that we still have to juggle when our people are working. So some of the flexibility we would love to get if it wasn't that way, but we're working towards that. We have formal work from home agreements in place for all of our staff, including our casuals. And as I said, we have an absolute case-by-case approach, which allows us to deal with some of the challenges raised by Deepak in his presentation. Things like the working from home environment, access to space that's either safe or suitable, and some of those mental health issues. For us, it was often people that needed to be in the office because of those challenges. So if we reflect, what would we say our biggest challenges were working through this environment? Multi-home use, and we've heard that before. Whilst someone might have a family computer, when there's 5 of you needing to use it, it does actually make it challenging. But equally, when there's 5 spaces that are required, throw in homeschooling on the top of things, and it became really challenging for a large proportion of our staff. So we actually worked with them to say, well, how can we make this work? How do we make it that you shift to an evening work arrangement, if that makes sense for you? So our goal was fit in with the needs of our staff and their families as much as we could, and balance that where we could with other workforce options. We still don't know yet the true flow on in relation to Comcare cases, whether it's going to see, some of our liabilities increase or decrease, or in turn, the long-term work from home WHS impacts. Part of the work from home agreement sees our staff need to actually give us a photo of their setup. And, we can take an approach that sees us assess suitability. But again, it relies on, the honesty. That might be a work point that someone else's. It might be a work point that they're using, but actually there's 3 of them sharing it. So again, we don't yet know what those longer term impacts are. We've seen some real impact on our annual leave usage in that it is reduced extensively. And probably, if I think about it, would I want to go and have a holiday if all I can do is stay at home because we're in lockdown? Probably not. But equally, there's some long-term health impacts with that. We very much support and in fact insist on our staff taking leave over a period. So it is yet to be seen, the longer term impacts of that. Consistency. So again, consistent doesn't mean things have to be the same. So how do we create consistency around foundation, but still empower our leaders to make decisions that are right for either their business area or their people? System stability. We've had some real challenges because we've had to rethink how our staff operate and connect with support and even tech escalations and things like that. So making sure that all of our systems are stable is an ongoing challenge for us. And probably one of the other really big things that we have seen, really impact some of our leaders is actually letting go of some of that old school perception stuff. So, I've got to see a person to know they're performing well. Equally, we have some functions that can only actually be done in the office. Believe it or not, we still receive millions of pieces of paper every year, and we have really big machines that scan that paper and put it in our system. So, when it's an environment such as what we've got now, that still poses a challenge for us. But we did have to really rethink all of our thinking and almost check in and reimagine not just support, but onboarding. We engaged new people. How did that work when they weren't in the office? Performance, the social aspects, engagement. And shifting for us into, a business as usual kind of environment. We're about to head into our tax time period, and we've got different risks now than we've ever faced before. So how do we rethink how we deal with them? I'll probably pause there, but I probably call out, even just from listening to not just Paul, Deepak, and Michael, I love the concept, Deepak, you called out around risk profiling our workforce from a work from home perspective. And for me, it's certainly something that I'm really going to go away and have a think about around that maturity model and how do we actually ensure that our strategies pick up those different needs. Michael, I think back to you.
Well, it's actually me, Fran, but thank you very much for that. That's okay, no problems. I'm cheeky enough to say it's me, pick me. We're almost at time, but there is one, and lots of questions have come in, but there's one question that I particularly want to ask of Paul and yourself, and that is, if you knew in February 2020 what you know now, what's the number one thing, so you got 30 seconds, it's a grab, that you would do differently? Paul, you first.
No, mine's really easy, and it's been my policy for years. And I don't know, it's one of those things that you go, just make sure that your people can work from home in case for your BCP. And it's something I've always thought of from a leader perspective. Never thought it would bite me in the ass from a call centre perspective. So yeah, get work from home right. If I could go back and do that, yeah, I'd be better prepared.
Perfect. Fran.
Similar to Paul, not only can they, but what equipment do they have? If we knew by the push of a button who had a computer or who needed one, or all those things associated with that work from home solution, that would have saved a whole lot of time and activity from our perspective.
Wonderful, thank you. So anybody that's asked questions that we haven't got to, I promise you, Deepak, Michael, Paul, or Fran will come back to you with a response post the webinar. So your questions are not lost, I promise you that. So with that, I think we need to go to closing remarks, and maybe if we go to you first, Mr. Clark, with your closing thoughts.
Thank you, Fiona. I think lots of really useful insight and intel in today's session. It all boils down to caring for your employees and looking after their best interests. Everything we've heard today is all about making sure your employees are supported, safe, well, and able to do their jobs. And I think that's a critical factor in this environment, but also going forward.
Thanks, Michael. Paul?
Oh, yeah, nothing else. Happy to give to someone else.
Thank you, Fran.
I think picking up on Michael's comment, that actually means our role as leaders is actually what will drive the Great Resignation, not just conceptually the idea that there's another job out there. Our role as leaders keeps people here.
Absolutely. And lastly, Deepak, your closing remarks, please.
I just want to say thank you, Fiona, for hosting, and the rest of the panelists who brought interesting and very insightful insights, as lots of us listening to them would have heard. I think if there's only one thing I can leave everybody with is, look, people are human beings, and they do have, they are complex. We don't have the same work platform as everybody else. And if you can get that profile, and even if we believe that we as an organization are doing what is right, even though we've ticked the boxes, review it constantly, because life changes all the time. And if you can do that, you will go towards a sustainable, productive, healthy and well workforce, which serves every customer.
Thanks, Deepak. Well, thank you to the panel today. Wonderful, sage advice, transparency with your experiences. We got the good, the bad and the ugly, and we like that because that's being really authentic, and it makes it real for all of us being part of the audience. Thank you to all of you for hanging in there until the end. I hope that you do have some great insights to take back to your respective businesses. Take care, stay safe, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.